Started today. Welcome to the developer call of May. Just to make sure, we follow the CNCF code of conduct. So, this meeting is recorded. If you're uncomfortable with that, this is the time to hop off. But yeah, all of our developer calls are also recorded and posted on YouTube afterwards. So you can look at it afterwards. But cool. Yeah. So for this meeting, let's start off with announcements. I think the two that we have right now is we're going to be in KubeCon next week, and we're going to both have virtual office hours as well as an in-person booth. So we would love for y'all to either come by the booth if you're there in person or show up to virtual office hours. Wherever you may be.
Cool.
And then going to the agenda, let's see, the first thing is talking about how Akri discovers authenticated devices. And I'll pass that off to Kate.
Awesome. Thanks, Cedric. So one thing that Akri has been having some discussion on in our issues is how do we discover devices that require authentication. So for example, for OnVIF, we have an issue up where if you are using cameras that require authentication, Akri cannot discover them. This is because certain information is not available that we use to identify the cameras, specifically MAC address. And there would be other ways to obtain that. But one of the best ways to do that would be by enabling authentication scenarios, because there are plenty of scenarios where you only want Akri to discover authenticated devices, because that means that Akri is a source of truth and that you're not having Kubernetes resources there for devices that aren't trusted yet. Previously, though, we've kept Akri's discovery handlers out of this because we wanted to leave it on the end workload or the broker to have to do that, to handle authenticating with devices. In a way, this was to make it so that a user can come with their own scenarios for authentication, and also to kind of leave that in the user's domain. But more and more, it's becoming a fact that we should have a solution in Akri that's optional, but for passing credentials to Akri in order to authenticate with devices. So wanted to kind of maybe show a diagram of how we're doing things today and kind of what this could mean. Let me share screen. This is always fun, the claiming host. 1 second.
There has to be an easier way.
Okay. A moment. I guess while this is loading, one thing that's interesting here to discuss is that in IoT scenarios, ideally, you know all the devices on your network. There's an idea of a device registry that's kind of essential to zero trust in the IoT space. So you should know all of your devices on your network. And because of that, you'll be able to have a certificate store for each of those devices somewhere. Hopefully in that device registry, you have kind of a client and a server certificate or the equivalent, or some type of certificate chain in the case of X509 certificates. And so you can use this to enable authentication with Akri. 1 second, I'm still looking for the host key. Can you make me host, Cedric, or I usually have?
I don't think I can.
Okay, I found it. I usually have that ready, but I didn't today. Great. So currently today, like I was saying, we enable it so that you can create a Kubernetes secret for, and I'm going to be talking through an OPC scenario here since our end-to-end demo uses OPC to enable brokers authenticating with discovered devices. But we can then extrapolate beyond that to ONBIF, for example, or other protocols that we don't yet discover or we don't yet do discovery with Akri. So with OPC we have in our end-to-end demo where so long as the OPC servers you're trying to discover have some shared intermediate certificate, what you could do is your broker, so long as its certificate comes from the same intermediate, you can then establish a secure channel. And that's in the OPC spec, and they enable authentication that way. So in this example, you have your broker, which has this client 2 certificate, and this server that has this server 2 certificate, and they have this same chain of trust, and therefore they can authenticate and create a secure channel. However, the discovery handler does not have a certificate. So all it's doing is hitting the publicly accessible endpoints of these devices and gathering whatever information it can there. So for OPC that's the application name, that's security policies, and that's profiles for OPC But, and then the onus is on the broker to authenticate. What that means is, say this is some untrusted device, we've created a Kubernetes resource for it and deployed a broker to use it. And it's not until the broker tries to authenticate and that fails that that's realized. And there's no way for the broker to report that back to the discovery handler to say, hey, this is not a trusted device, remove it, don't continue to deploy brokers, etc. So then the goal would be, let's get these credentials to the discovery handler so that we can avoid that scenario. So one way to do that would be mounting the certificates into the discovery handler as a secret, or some way of using a secret store to pass discovery handlers, pass certificates to this discovery handler. In the case where all of your OPC servers have the same intermediate, you could then just have one certificate in the discovery handler. If they have different ones, you would have to have multiple, but you would mount any number of necessary certificates into the discovery handler or pass those secrets. Then the discovery handler not only discovers the publicly accessible information like the previous one, but also can do more privileged access after creating a secure channel, like navigating the namespace of an OPC server. And in that way, for OPC specifically, you could discover if there's multiple devices, multiple sensors, et cetera, behind this one OPC server. So you could do more specific discovery there and even discover multiple devices per OPC server. So authenticating not only verifies that this is a trusted device, but also can enable more specific device filtering and more precise device discovery, since in the case of some of these protocols, there's oftentimes multiple devices behind one endpoint. So that was just kind of an overview. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to add here. And then you can see here that after it's discovered, you would then would have the broker would also authenticate that's deployed. So it's two sets of authentication there. So what does this look like implementation wise? It would look like this would be a toggle. You could enable this or not, up to you. And in the discovery handler, it would require that after discovering the device, it would then go through any authentication steps for that protocol. There would need to be a way, in the case of multiple certificates, there would need to be a way to identify what certificate is associated with what device. So that's something we need to drill into more, is that what is the common practice in people's device registries for tying a certificate to a device? So how will the discovery handler know that device A uses certificate A and device B uses certificate B, rather than brute force trying to use them all? So those are some of the issues that we're going to need to think through as well. But for a POC of this, we could certainly do a scenario where we have a shared intermediate certificate among all of the servers, and the discovery handler also uses that same certificate chain. So that's just an overview of at least some preliminary thoughts on this. Do people have any ideas or thoughts or some use cases that they've heard of?
I have some thoughts on this loosely with regards to Bluetooth, but I'm trying to collect my thoughts for a minute before I say something silly. So give me a
Cool.
minute here.
Yeah. I think one thing I would like to know from a perspective of like IoT device users and out there is, what is your certificate? What does your device registry look like? Like I mentioned, how are you associating certificate and device? And yeah, also how are we going to manage certificate rotation here? Is this and how are the credentials past the discovery handler? Is this something where it can reach out to some secret store dynamically upon discovery, and so then it always has the proper certificate? Or is this something where the discovery handler's lifetime is associated with the certificate's lifetime? Like, how do we handle that as well?
Well, so the secret store, when Akri is given the configuration for whatever devices you're connecting to it, like that's just applied as like a fat conf file that you're passing like at the startup time of the cube, right?
Yeah.
Could maybe that like the certificate be passed as like a blob that we decrypt when on the cube start, maybe?
So are you saying, can we pass certificates to the discovery handler via Akri's configuration? Is that your question?
Exactly.
So we do that with our broker scenario in the sense that you can create a Kubernetes secret and you can then ensure that that goes into the broker. On the discovery handler side, I mean, we would need to modify the configuration to allow fields for adding a Kubernetes secret there. And that's a good question. That's one of the ways we need to think about this. The discovery handler could also be pre-configured or could take in an environment variable or something of the sorts that tells it what to reach out to in order to get credentials or something along those lines. Or maybe it always has a Kubernetes secret. Yeah, I think that's something we'll need to think through a little bit as well. And I think it will, ideally you're doing this with a key management system in Kubernetes, and whatever way we do a POC is certainly not going to be the best because you don't want to just use Kubernetes secrets for certificates, but it would work for a POC scenario, hopefully. But we do need to think of a way that's generic enough to get the credentials to the discovery handler. Maybe, so I guess one thing I would like to take out of this is maybe we can write up a proposal of some sort to go in Akri's docs under the proposals section. Beyond these images, it sounds like one thing we want to drill into based off what Jake was saying is, what does it look like to get that those credentials to the discovery handler? What else do you all feel like we should dig into more here? Obviously, we have a lot of thought that needs to go in here, but it might be nice to have some sort of proposal that's a draft that we can continue this discussion on asynchronously as people are able to kind of think through the scenario on their own. anything else that for that draft you all think needs to be added? Okay, I think one thing that would maybe be nice is some sort of hacked solution. Maybe just spending some time kind of playing around with that and referencing it, maybe a demo or something like that. But that's kind of a prerequisite would be the first, or one way of doing the first.
Yeah. I think kind of a weird caveat to this is like obviously different devices are going to have different authentication protocols, right? So, I mean, like Bluetooth, you'll go through a pairing ritual. That's something like that's a completely separate issue. That's something I'm very confused about. But like for something over UDEV, like does that even authenticate or just because UDEV is usually like a connected device as far as I'm aware. But like OMVIF, I don't know much about that, but I think we need to kind of see what the landscape of authentication that we roughly are going to be need to eventually kind of support would look like. I think, you know, supplying certificates or whatever, supplying secrets is one thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Another.
Yeah, I think discussing what are the prevalent like authentication types. So from my understanding, X509 is kind of the prevalent one, but also ONVIF does have user password enabled, but maybe we wouldn't allow that to start. Also TPM based would be something in the future to consider. So I think that's a good point, including a section on kind of what's out there, what are the prevalent protocols support. And that can be a section that ideally grows as people kind of add their thoughts there. Like you could add a section on Bluetooth and we could kind of break it down like that. So that's a great idea. Awesome. Well, I think this will be a conversation we can continue within a proposal of sorts. But I'm glad to have been able to get through some overview of it at least. So I'll pass it back to you, Edric.
Cool. Yeah. So going through the agenda on the list, it seems like Bluetooth discovery handler investigation. I'll pass it on to you, Jake.
Cool. All right. Let's see. Can I claim host? Or claim host is how you share screen, right?
I just made you host, Jake.
Oh,
You're good to go.
Okay. All right. Let's see how well this actually works. Yeah, that'll do. Okay. Can y'all see this?
Yeah,
Okay,
we can
cool.
see it.
So, well, firstly, I'll be honest. I did probably not enough on the Bluetooth discovery, but what I was mostly concerned with is what does Bluetooth as a protocol look like, and then what are some of the libraries that we can use to support the protocol stack. So Bluetooth itself, there's two major classes of Bluetooth. One, you have Bluetooth Classic, which is kind of Bluetooth 2 and below, and then you have Bluetooth 3 plus, which includes Bluetooth Low Energy. These will typically, so in Bluetooth you'll have a leader and then peripheral nodes connected to that leader. The leader is actually can shift. So the leader in this case is like the Bluetooth device. So if you have like some Bluetooth like a Bluetooth camera or something, then that is the leader. And then like the thing it's connected to is considered the client. In Bluetooth, you can have, different networks of devices connected to each other. So that's what we call like a piconet, where you have one leader node, several followers, and then a scatter net is where you have multiple overlapping piconets. So that bit is kind of important because hypothetically, Akri would want to connect to only one of those leaders, right? Where the broker for Akri becomes the leader in its piconet, and then it connects to one device, and that device can be spawned out to whatever other devices that are in its respective piconet. Where it gets kind of hairy though is the authentication part of it, oddly enough, because Bluetooth, you pick up your phone to connect to Bluetooth headsets and whatnot. You go through a pairing ritual, and once you're paired, you share your MAC addresses with each other, but like you don't have there's not like a shared secret that you would know ahead of time to connect over it. So that's kind of the trouble where I'm getting into when I'm trying to connect to a device that I have not connected to before.
When you say shared secret, do you mean there's no way of it's a specific secret, so you need to have the matching? Okay.
Right. Yeah. Like you don't get a match until you pair. So that's tricky. You can discover whatever Bluetooth devices are advertising that they're willing to make a connection. That the discovery part is fine. It's just like connecting is a little wonky because you have to Akri. Please correct me if I'm wrong on something here, but it's just, you know what your device is and you're able to connect to that device. On this end, it would be you would have to, the device that you're trying to connect into Akri, you need to be with that device and say yes, I'm going to advertise now to connect to a new resource, which I have not figured out a way to really work with yet, if I'm being honest.
So to make sure I understand, what information is publicly accessible about a device? Its MAC address, is that what you're saying?
Right. I could show what's discovered. I'm not actually sure if that's, we're recording this meeting. If I just go into discovery, I'm just going to end up blasting everything that's in my apartment building. I don't know that that's really appropriate. Maybe I could maybe I'd have to go through.
I think that could be something to follow up maybe in the meeting notes, just to put these are kind of the main values that are discovered publicly. And then you're saying the concern is with the broker. How do we give the broker the right credential to connect to the specific device?
Exactly.
So in a normal scenario of you just wanting to connect to Bluetooth device A, Akri's not in the picture. How would that client get that certificate?
The Bluetooth device will advertise that's willing to make paired connections, and then when you have your your phone or whatever the device is, you'll see the list of advertising Bluetooth devices, and identified by some metadata name and then a MAC address on that. When they pair, that's when they share their secret.
Okay. How is the phone in that case how is it verifying the public certificate of the device? Or I guess maybe that's details we need to dig into.
Details I need to dig into.
I think this is always the tricky part with these scenarios. Another question then is, so it sounds like this is an interesting scenario because while can we only discover the Bluetooth device when it's advertising itself as well?
Yes, or
Okay.
as far as I'm aware, like you have to, that the device has to be discovering in order to make connections.
Okay, so it has to be in discovery mode. And then not only that, but when the broker's deployed, it's just going to need to sit there until the device is in discovery mode again.
As far as my hypothesis goes, yes. That's yeah. I'm
And that
sorry if I'm being
also,
non-committal on this, but
no, I think this is interesting. And so that also means the Bluetooth discovery handler is going to need to act a little differently. Because normally in our discovery handlers, they have a retry loop. So just to kind of, because one of the things with Akri is we'll tell you if the device goes down and bring down associated workloads. With Bluetooth, this sounds like a different concern because we might need to have different promises. The discovery handler for Bluetooth might say, we will discover the device, end of the story. Or maybe you just, maybe you do your discovery kind of as like a cron job. It's every once in a while, or I mean, these are issues that, or this is something that we might want Akri to evolve in anyways, of Akri's discovery handler discovering and going away instead of
right.
constantly running.
And that's actually, sorry if I'm cutting you off, but
No,
like
go
there
for
is
it.
something kind of tangentially related to that. So like if a cube goes unhealthy and then the cube dies, what I'm not sure what that looks like to the Bluetooth device itself, right? Does it look like you're trying to connect to a new device? Or I'm not sure what it looks like on the outside looking into whatever, like the Akri cube resource you're trying to connect to.
Is Cube a specific device?
No. I'm saying like the cube that holds the broker.
Oh, the node or the
Yeah.
will you repeat that question again?
So like the Bluetooth device, you make the pair, and it says, "Hey, I trust you now. Let's do business." And the like the Akri broker, like that's hosted off of some node. Node goes down, dies. Now it looks, and the new one is spawned by Kubernetes to replace it. What does that new node that spawn look like to that Bluetooth device? And is the Bluetooth device going to have to go into advertising mode again to repair to that new node?
Yeah, I mean, I think ideally the device doesn't care about nodes going up and down, but yeah. I mean, in that case, if the node went down, the broker would be scheduled to a different node, ideally, that had said it could see that device. But say you're in a scenario where only one node could see it. If the node comes back up, it's going to need to rediscover the device. Like the discovery handler will need to. And yeah, in the case of Bluetooth, it sounds like that device is going to need to be in advertising mode. Yeah, I'm curious with Bluetooth devices, how devices enter advertising mode. Is that a purely manual process, or is there some way to remotely have a device enter advertising mode? And if so, yeah. And if so, we should be able to discover the device. Like I wonder if Bluetooth devices always are in some sort of mode that enables them to be seen, but not necessarily paired with, would be my question.
Right. Yeah. I mean, once again, like I said, if I ran Discover last night, I see like all the devices like around my apartment building. So like, there's definitely like I have a hard time believing people are like manually advertising their connection constantly. So there's got to be like some sort of default, say like broadcast of some sort that's saying like I'm a device.
Okay, so yeah, it does sound like it doesn't need to be in pairing mode based off of some in order to be discovered. But it will need to be in pairing mode in order to be paired with, I would assume.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Yeah, I mean this is super interesting. And I think this will maybe push forward some changes in Akri that have been needing to happen.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Kind of moving into actually, is there any more questions on like this part? Or because like there is oh, I was looking at like that blue R and BTLE plug, and there were some interesting questions that I got from looking into that I kind of want to talk about briefly. But is there any other questions here?
I would be happy to transition. I guess Brian, Lior, Broa, Edric, do y'all have any background in Bluetooth or any questions or things, knowledge to add?
Yeah. I guess it's, oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, I've done a little bit with Bluetooth, but I don't really have any expertise.
Bluetooth is
No
kind
worries,
of
I
one of
think
the funny ones where it's like people use this like daily, even if they're not like doing a ton of IoT stuff in their house, and it just sort of
Yeah.
goes unnoticed, right?
I've implemented Bluetooth stacks and stuff, but not in a way that I really had to get into anything crazy. Just like, use the library. It works. It gets you your messages or whatever. I didn't do any authentication or anything like that.
Um, I think with Bluetooth devices, the interesting thing is that a lot of it also comes down to how the device itself is implemented. So, if you're looking at well, I guess like with Bluetooth Classic and also like BLE, there's a vast difference in sort of its capability and how it advertises, right? I think, and I could be totally wrong on this, but from what I understand, a lot of times is with BLE, oftentimes there's this kind of like it will just broadcast itself, right? And that's kind of how you pick up on all these random things around you. It doesn't necessarily have to be put into kind of discovery mode for it to kind of show up on your list of things. And then there's also like multi-pairing. But I think that might only be exclusively for the Bluetooth audio stack, where you can actually have this one device that's like paired to like everything, right? Like my Surface headphones, I can walk around depending on like it's both paired to my phone and my laptop and my other laptop at the same time, and it kind of handles that gracefully. I don't know if that stack is well, in some sense. It'd be nice if that was a capability that Akri can use, but at the same time, it's also up to the implementer of the device to have that enabled for us to use it, right? So it's kind of interesting where the behaviors of the Bluetooth devices are kind of defined by whoever manufactured the device, where certain devices will always kick back into discovery mode if it gets disconnected, but I don't think that necessarily always has to happen. So it's kind of this interesting part where I think from Akri's standpoint, you kind of just have to expect the unexpected, where if it comes back in discovery, we basically do our best efforts to try to reconnect to this thing.
Right. And I think that definitely plays into what Kate was saying, where maybe we need to relook at something where it's either have retry connections on like a cron or something, to kind of accommodate some of the weirder if your device is too weird, then like there's only so much you can do, right? Like at that point, you kind of, if you want this to connect to Akri, you almost have to contribute. But I mean, I think maybe I just probably need to say like, if we just take like a subset of Bluetooth devices, like Bluetooth cameras or Bluetooth temperature or Bluetooth things that take temperature, thermometers, yes. Do those follow any kind of common retry pattern, right? Because I mean, and a lot of headphone stuff, I'm not sure like headphones would be super in for Akri's case, but I mean, those still actually follow like a lot of the Bluetooth classic protocols anyway. So
Yeah, I think defining the discovery details here is going to be interesting, meaning defining what is passed from the configuration to the discovery handler, and making that generic enough, but also obviously targeted enough to be able to access these devices. And I think also the figuring out what is publicly accessible versus what is achieved through pairing, figuring out that delta there is helpful as well.
yeah.
But I think this is definitely a good start on the discussion of this too. I know you mentioned, Jake, wanting to talk a little bit about the libraries, Bluer versus BTLE plug. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I'll be short on those. Basically, like BlueR is the Rust implementation of the BlueZ protocol stack, like which is the Linux protocol stack for Bluetooth. So like BlueZ is like a C API, but BlueR is like the Rust implementation of that. Like these are these are two like the libraries that we have available to us. BlueR, Linux, BTLE plug is cross-platform, but like kind of the main API wise, they're actually pretty similar. But like the main difference is like BTLE plug doesn't support Bluetooth 2 or Bluetooth Classic. So like that just cuts out an entire subsection of devices. BlueR does, but like there's a lot of very kind of weird issues about BlueR where it's like it's only built for AMD 64. Like there's no integration tests. And like if I look at I made this table a little nicer. It looks like the BTLE plug is like has a little more community support. But like I don't know, it's hard to say, especially when you have like this is like the BlueR, like the BlueZ protocol is like a fairly like it's an established thing, right? So we're essentially choosing between these. It's looking at something community built versus something that is like has a longer history, even if it's probably not as polished, right? So yeah, it's a little. That's probably something that we might want to discuss later on, but I think that the main thing being like with BTLE plug, we kind of cut out like a subset of devices, and but we gain some cross-platform possibility.
Yeah, I think having ARM support would be pretty nice. With Akri currently we support ARM, and so it'd be nice to be consistent with that. It also would be helpful for me personally to understand what devices we'd be losing with BTLE plug. What is the breakdown of devices that use Bluetooth Classic?
Yeah. Bluetooth Classic is mainly headphones. Mainly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what was the other one you mentioned it doesn't support?
It's Bluetooth Classic. It's just basically just like Bluetooth Classic and so 2 and below. So 2 is kind of like the cutoff where Classic is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, like you said, I don't see headphones being the predominant scenario at all. I'd be very surprised to see someone using Akri with headphones, but that'd be interesting.
Right.
So I'm based on that. I don't see that as being a blocker for BTLE plug, but like you're mentioning, if BlueR is based on the more established BlueZ method, that also might be something. I think it might be fine to go with the one that seems the best now. And then later on, if people want to, and BlueR's further along in its journey, that's something that could be switched to.
Yeah. I think if we just like whatever, building a proof of concept in either is probably the priority, and then switching if we have to later. Because I mean, like really the main question is around around like the actual, connection part, which I mean, we could just pick I could just grab any Bluetooth low energy device around my apartment and then test that out. But that's
and it might be worth assessing the size of the two. which one's more compute intensive as well.
Hmm.
If for decision making as well, if we're focusing on like more constrained environments, I wouldn't expect a huge difference, but it might be worth looking at.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys for listening to me.
This is great. Thanks, Jake, for all this. Yeah, and I feel like if you want to do some of the thing that I was mentioning with authentication and put up a proposal that's like in draft mode to continue the discussion, or if you would prefer to kind of brainstorm on a HackMD page, that's also an option.
I got that one text document I had to open that was in the proposals repo, so I can just open that up as a draft and
Okay,
make it look a little bit nicer.
I think it looks good, but yeah, that'd be great. Awesome.
Cool. So I guess the next thing on the list is just talking about decluttering Akri's main repo. Right now, there's some samples tools that are kind of mixed in. Yeah, maybe it's time to recondo some of it and pull some stuff out.
Yeah, I can add a point there. So we had an OPCUA certificate generator that we pulled out last week. It was being actively maintained, and there are plenty, such as the one hosted by the OPCUA Foundation, that can be used. So there was not really a reason for Akri to have our own. So I think that's an example of something that was decluttered and full on removed. I think there are other things now that Project Akri has its own GitHub org that can be moved, and part of that could be discovery handlers and our broker samples and our sample applications, mainly the brokers and sample applications. I think could be probably moved into a samples, like an Akri samples repository, just so we can focus on what is Akri and then what are samples. I think that would be good to distinguish.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. How easy do you think pulling those out of the repo would be? Is it gonna break any of the containers or anything like that, or should it just be a simple move over?
I wouldn't say it's entirely simple, mainly because of our workflows. So what triggers each workflow, and we would have some duplication there. So for example, for ARM support, we cross-build all of our REST code. And so we would need to duplicate that workflow or we could just pull that container, because now I think we put it in our registry. But we would need to modify most of our, or several of our workflow files, and some pipeline duplication, and document where people need to go for what is a big one.
Right.
Brian, do you have any thoughts on this? Having spent a lot of time with the workflows.
I'm sorry, I was pulled aside into something else. The workflows regarding what, cleaning up, or sorry?
So one discussion being on, should we move samples out of Akri's main repository and put them in their own repository, and what would kind of some of that work look like to do?
I think that's fine. I don't think that'd be too. I don't think there's a lot of like spaghetti code in the workloads and stuff. I mean, there's some, but you know, you could move. You could always have other shared libraries, right? That, you know, just introducing layers and layers, which, you know, if it speeds up any particular phase, it's probably a good thing, especially if we don't change certain things very often. I don't have any negative feelings about doing that other than what the prioritization could possibly be. Doesn't seem like the highest thing in my mind.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't think it's a high priority item. I think it's one that would be good to have our samples somewhere else, but I think it's something to keep in mind down the road if something were to open up, or if that was something that we needed to do a whole like reorganizing, that would be something to put on the list. But regardless, I think the OPCUA certificate generator was an example of something that was able to be removed. And I think once we get to the point where we'll have multiple brokers for certain protocols, so we have an issue up on creating a new sample application for OPCUA, I think at that point, it might be good to start putting those somewhere else is one thought. So to create a new location, I don't know if that's just more confusing. It probably is. But as we continue to add samples, or maybe we just point to people's samples externally, would be actually a good option as well. So something to keep in mind. Okay, I think our last thing is triage, if I'm not wrong. Edric, does that seem right?
Yep.
Okay.
Do I need to give up host? Probably.
I think I can just claim it again.
Oh, okay. Take it.
I will take it off your hands. Maybe I might need you to pass it to me. If you go to participants.
Yeah, I just
Oh,
just gave it to you.
awesome. Thank you. Wonderful. Okay, so can everyone see our project roadmap here? Great. So this is where with Akri we kind of keep track of making sure we're looking at issues and carrying them forward. So we have 4 right here that we kind of need to triage and make sure we're addressing. These top 2, I actually reopened. They were closed by our bot that automatically closes things after a set amount of time. So there are 2 security, REST security issues with our dependencies, namely because within kubeRS, which is our Kubernetes REST client that we use, it uses this crate called Chrono, which uses this crate called Time, which has a security issue. There is still work underway for Chrono to remove its dependency of Time. And all of this is then will need to be bubbled up to kubeRS, which we'll be able to update to the latest version of that to remove this security issue. But at the time being, there aren't any specific actions we can take. I did link in the latest conversations there as I was looking into them. So are there any questions on this? I was going to move that to backlog if that seems like an appropriate spot.
Didn't Chrono say like they weren't gonna fix that? I just know like I vaguely remember that conversation from like another thing I was working on. But
yeah, so they're let me see. They did say something along those lines. I remember reading that statement as well. But kubeRS was still finding a way around it, from my understanding.
but like if it doesn't affect it, I guess maybe just we need to look at the justification. Like if Chrono is saying like it's not going to affect their use case, then would it not affect kubeRS? But I don't know. Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to add.
No, I think this is important. Yeah. Let's take some more look into that. So you're saying, Jake, that Chrono was saying that it doesn't actually affect them despite the security advisory being thrown on them.
Yeah. If I, I can find that thing that I'm thinking of, and I can DM you or just throw it in the
Cool.
channel.
Or add it to either of these issues, maybe.
Yeah, that's better.
In that case, I'll move these to investigating since we're looking at that. Thanks, Jake.
Gotcha.
Okay, so another one is this issue. Let me refresh myself on this. So one issue with this was our OPC demo was out of date. So in the sense of we have you build some sample OPC servers and we weren't pointing to a specific branch or tag. And so if you just pulled the latest, the lines that we were referencing needing changes, et cetera, were not helpful. They were out of date. And so I went back and changed the demo to point to the specific tag that it was associated with. That being said, there's another issue, which might be the next one, to use different servers in our sample. Specifically, there's a OPC PLC server. So it's like a Mox being a PLC controller that's fully containerized, easy to deploy. And we should use that in our demo. It would require changing our end application and our write-up and our broker. So there's a lot to it, but you can go ahead and use it. You can go ahead and discover it with Akri now, and you could probably write a new broker pretty quickly. But so yeah, with this one, I updated it. I think this might be fine to close, given that we updated it, got a thumbs up. I'll go ahead and ask if it's, yeah, if we can go ahead and close out. I'll follow up on this. Great. And last one is create a label for discovery handler issues, PRs, and exclude it from Steelbot. Roa, do you want to talk a little bit about this one? I can go ahead and open it up and read it too. So it says, create a new label to track issues and PRs related to adding a new discovery handler. Oh, Roa, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sorry, I'm sick, so my voice is terrible. But
oh, no worries.
yeah, I can speak to to this one. So I think we have right now the stale bot that would run periodically and mark issues as stale, issues and PRs, but the stale. However, there are a couple of things that we want to keep in exclusively available that we have this other keep alive label, but then there are some like kind of future work we want to maintain. So instead of us having to like go every time and add this like keep alive, we wanted to have a label for discovery handlers and things that we want to, yeah, just by default keep them alive. We don't have to do that triage issue every time. So yeah, this is just simply tracking that work. So I think that would be like a good first issue in my opinion, and we can definitely put in our backlog. So that the work would be just creating the labels, documenting that somewhere, and then updating our stale bot to take those exclusions.
Cool. So create new label for discovery handler work. Modify stale bot. And I feel like there was one other row, and it might have been between 1 and 2.
Yeah, I would say documenting that. So maybe, yeah, maybe you can just add that to maybe
Definitely.
new issues template saying that, hey, if this is a discovery hand, new discovery hand or something, then add this label to the issue. So
Can anyone add labels? No.
no. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Actually, that's a good point.
So that would be a reason to have it maybe be its own issue template. We might be
Yeah.
able
Hmm.
to have labels automatically be added for certain templates. I'm not sure if that's an option.
Yeah, actually, I don't know either.
Okay. So we may need to enable this via commenting or look into if this. Oh, I think because bug issue templates automatically have bugs. I think we can do this. Okay. Great. So, awesome. So we'll go ahead and put that in backlog. And yeah, I think that closes out all of our issues for triaging. And I think that pretty much concludes our agenda. Yeah, and we're right on time. So no open discussion time. But any last thoughts, comments? Cool. So it sounds like some of the takeaways from today were let's get some sort of document or proposal going on credentials for discovery handlers in Akri for Bluetooth. Keep in mind how we may want to split out our repository and also that we have KubeCon coming up. Great. Well, I think that concludes our meeting. Thank you everyone for coming. And our next one is in a month. So the first Tuesday of every month.
Nice.
Awesome.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Later.